12,000 years ago, on a lonely limestone hill in southeastern Anatolia, people raised stone pillars before cities, before kings, before writing, and perhaps even before farming had fully begun. They carved foxes, snakes, vultures, and strange faceless figures into stone, then buried the entire place as if they wanted the mystery sealed forever. This is Göbekli Tepe, and it still challenges everything archaeology once believed about the birth of civilization. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. If this is the kind of ancient mystery you enjoy, the hill does not look like the beginning of civilization. It rises gently from the limestone country of southeastern Anatolia, a rounded swell above a dry and open landscape where the wind moves over pale stone, scrub, and fields that are modern only on the surface. Beneath that quiet ground, long before the first pyramids, long before the first kings of Mesopotamia, long before writing fixes a human voice into clay, people gather around pillars taller than themselves and carve animals into stone with a seriousness that still feels difficult to explain. The place is known today as Göbekli Tepe, but the name is only a modern label placed over something much older, something buried so completely that for thousands of years it disappears from memory. When archaeologists begin to uncover it, they do not find a city, they do not find palaces, workshops, streets, or ordinary houses. They find circles of stone. They find pillars shaped like human forms without faces. They find foxes, snakes, boars, cranes, vultures, and strange abstract signs. They find a monument built at a time when, according to older expectations, no monument like this is supposed to exist. The mystery begins with that contradiction. Around 12,000 years ago, near the end of the last ice age, human beings in this region are not yet living in cities. They are not ruled by kings. They are not leaving behind written laws, tax records, or royal tombs. The people who shape this hill belong to a world that archaeology long described as the world before civilization, a world of hunters, gatherers, shifting camps, seasonal movements, and intimate knowledge of wild landscapes. Yet here, on this ridge, they carve limestone pillars weighing several tons and arrange them in carefully planned enclosures. They create a place that requires memory, labour, coordination, and belief. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. If this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, the story that follows is not a tale of a lost empire, but of something more unsettling, a glimpse of human imagination at the threshold before agriculture, before cities, before the familiar architecture of history begins. For much of the 20th century, the broad outline seemed clear enough. First came farming. Farming allowed people to settle. Settlement created surplus. Surplus allowed specialization, hierarchy, priesthoods, temples, armies, and eventually states. Religion, monumental architecture, and formal ritual were often seen as products of settled life. The cultural flowering that followed the hard, practical business of growing food. In that model, temples rose because villages had become stable and rich enough to build them. Göbekli Tepe does not destroy this model entirely, but it disturbs it. It stands too early, too large, and too symbolically dense to fit comfortably into the older sequence. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how the site functioned. But the hill forces a profound adjustment. It suggests that ritual imagination and communal gathering may not simply have followed settled life. They may have helped create the conditions that made settled life possible. The first impression of Göbekli Tepe is not of domestic comfort. The enclosures do not resemble homes. Their interiors are dominated by great T-shaped pillars, often set in rings, with two larger central pillars facing one another. Some of these stones bear carved arms and hands, as though the pillar itself represents a stylized human body. Others carry belts, loincloth-like forms, and animal images that move across the stone with surprising force. The figures are not casual decoration. They are cut into the surfaces with intention, and they appear in combinations that resist simple interpretation. A fox curves along a pillar, a snake coils or descends, a bird stretches its neck, a wild boar shows its bristling energy. These are not the animals of a farmyard. They are creatures of the surrounding wild world, powerful, dangerous, watchful, and familiar to people whose survival depends on reading tracks, seasons, migrations, and behavior. What survives in the record suggests a symbolic landscape where the boundary between human beings and animals is charged with meaning. That is part of the haunting quality of the site. Göbekli Tepe appears at a turning point in deep history, when the world itself is changing. The great ice sheets are retreating far to the north. Climate shifts disturb patterns of vegetation and animal movement. In the Fertile Crescent, wild cereals grow in abundance in some zones, and human communities become increasingly skilled at exploiting them. The old life of mobile foraging does not simply vanish, and farming does not arrive everywhere at once like a single invention. Instead, the transition is uneven, regional, experimental, and long. People continue to hunt wild gazelle, gather plants, process grains, and move through landscapes they understand in ways that leave only faint traces for modern researchers. In this uncertain world, a hilltop sanctuary or gathering place can become more than a structure. It can become a point of return, a place where scattered groups meet, remember, compete, feast, mourn, and bind themselves together. Still, no single explanation fully accounts for this. If the site is a temple, then it is a temple without the later machinery of temple economies. If it is a gathering place, then it is one built with astonishing symbolic investment. If it is connected to ancestors, death, hunting magic, social alliance, initiation, seasonal feasting, or all of these at once, the evidence does not yet allow a final answer. The word temple itself can mislead, because it carries the weight of later civilizations. With priests, gods, offerings, and formal institutions, Göbekli Tepe belongs to a world before those categories are clear. Its builders do not leave written explanations. They do not tell later generations what the fox means, why the snakes appear, why the pillars face inward, or why the enclosures are eventually buried. Archaeology must work from stone, bone, soil, tool marks, animal remains, and spatial patterns. It must reconstruct intention from what has survived by accident, by abandonment, or perhaps by deliberate concealment. The concealment is one of the strangest details. Many of the enclosures are not merely left to collapse. They are filled in, covered with debris, stones, animal bones, and sediments, as though the builders or their descendants choose to close them. This act turns the hill into an archive sealed by human hands. It preserves the pillars with remarkable power, but it also deepens the mystery. A monument built with such effort is then hidden. The stones return to darkness. The carved animals disappear from sight. Generations pass. Climates shift. Villages grow elsewhere. Agriculture spreads, and the memory of the hill dissolves. By the time later civilizations rise in Mesopotamia, the great enclosures are already ancient beyond ordinary memory. When the first cities begin to write their myths, Göbekli Tepe has long been sleeping beneath the ground. What makes the site so powerful is not only its age, but its position at the edge of a transformation. It stands at the threshold between worlds. On one side lies the immense span of hunter-gatherer life, hundreds of thousands of years of human adaptation, mobility, and intimate partnership with changing environments. On the other side lies the road toward villages, fields, granaries, property, population growth, conflict, inequality, and the civilizations that will dominate recorded history. Göbekli Tepe does not provide a simple bridge between these worlds. It is more like a shadow cast across the crossing, a reminder that human beings do not become complex only when they begin to farm. They carry complexity already, in memory, ritual, art, grief, fear, cooperation, and the urge to gather around meanings larger than survival. The hill, then, is not merely an archaeological site. It is a challenge resting in limestone. It asks how much of civilization begins in practical need, and how much begins in shared imagination. It asks whether people first settle because they learn to feed themselves differently, or whether they begin to feed themselves differently because certain places, ceremonies, and obligations pull them back again and again. The answer is not settled, and careful scholars resist turning one site into a complete explanation for all human history. Yet the carved pillars of Göbekli Tepe remain impossible to ignore. They stand in the mind like figures seen at dusk, human and not human, silent and commanding, facing one another across an enclosure built before the world was supposed to have such things. The 12,000-year-old mystery does not haunt archaeology because it offers no evidence. It haunts archaeology because the evidence is real, massive, beautifully carved, and still not enough. Around the hill, the old world is loosening its grip. The landscape that surrounds Göbekli Tepe is not yet the settled countryside known from later history, with villages folded into fields and herds moving under human ownership. It belongs to the long ending of the Ice Age, a time when climate does not change as a smooth and gentle line, but in pulses, reversals, recoveries, and shocks. Far to the north, enormous ice sheets still shape winds and seas. Across the Near East, rainfall, temperature, vegetation, and animal ranges shift in ways that humans must feel before they can ever measure. Valleys that once supported one pattern of plants begin to support another. Herds move through corridors of grass and steppe. Wild cereals ripen in certain seasons, dense enough in some places to reward careful gathering, but never yet obedient to the hand. The people who come to the limestone ridge live inside this unstable abundance. They are not poor wanderers waiting for civilization to begin. They are experts of a changing earth. The southeastern Anatolian plateau sits near one of the most important ecological crossroads in human history. To the south and west stretch zones that will later become part of the Fertile Crescent, where wild einkorn wheat, barley, pulses, pistachio, almond, and other useful plants grow in patchy but meaningful abundance. To the north and east rise mountains and uplands that catch moisture and create varied habitats. Between them are plains, limestone ridges, seasonal streams, and open spaces visited by wild gazelle, aurochs, onager, boar, deer, foxes, birds, and smaller animals whose bones rarely carry the same drama but matter deeply to daily life. The builders of Göbekli Tepe know this world through movement. They know when plants seed, where flint can be found, where animals pass, where water holds after rain, where stone breaks cleanly, and where a high hill can be seen from far away. This is one of the quiet surprises of the period. The end of the Ice Age does not produce a simple story in which desperation alone forces invention. In some regions, warmer and wetter conditions expand resources. In others, sudden cooling or drying creates stress. The evidence remains incomplete because ancient climate records are stitched together from lake sediments, cave deposits, pollen, ice cores, and archaeological traces that do not always speak with one voice. Yet what survives in the record suggests that people in the Near East are navigating both opportunity and uncertainty. They can gather wild grains in quantity, but wild harvests vary. They can hunt large animals, but herds move. They can return to favoured places, but the conditions that make those places valuable are not fixed forever. A society shaped by such conditions may become deeply attached to memory, timing, and gathering places, because survival depends not only on food, but on knowing when and where life concentrates. Near Göbekli Tepe, the stone itself offers another kind of resource. Limestone outcrops lie close to the surface, and this matters. Monumental building does not begin only with belief. It also begins with material possibility. A society may imagine pillars, but it needs stone that can be cut, shaped, and moved. The ridge provides slabs of limestone that can be quarried with stone tools and human labour. Flint, too, is available in the region, giving people sharp edges for hunting, cutting, scraping, carving, and working other materials. These details sound practical, almost plain, but they form part of the mystery. The monument grows from a landscape that supplies not only food and animals, but the physical ingredients of construction. It is as though the hill offers both stage and substance. The people who travel through this country are often called hunter-gatherers, but the phrase can flatten their world. It can make them sound simple, as if they merely take what nature offers and move on. In reality, late Ice Age foragers in this region possess complex knowledge systems, social ties, ritual habits, technologies, and seasonal strategies. They shape stone into blades and points. They process plants with grinding stones. They make use of skins, fibres, wood, bone, and basketry, much of which vanishes from the archaeological record because it decays. They likely tell stories, mark identities, remember places, and pass down rules about kinship, exchange, hunting, marriage, and obligation. No written record preserves their institutions, and scholars still debate how large and stable their social networks were, but their monuments warn against imagining them as scattered bands without ambition. The hill reveals a capacity for planning that must already exist before the first pillar is raised. One lesser-known feature of this wider transition is that people are already experimenting with degrees of settlement before full agriculture takes hold. In parts of the Levant, Natufian communities had lived in more settled or semi-settled ways even before the construction of Göbekli Tepe, using stone houses, cemeteries, and intensive plant gathering. Their world is not identical to southeastern Anatolia, and no single cultural pattern can be stretched across the entire region without caution. Still, these neighbouring developments show that the old boundary between mobile foragers and settled farmers is too sharp. Human groups can return to favoured sites season after season. They can store food in limited ways. They can build more permanent structures for certain purposes while still relying heavily on wild resources. They can become attached to place before they become farmers in the later sense. Göbekli Tepe belongs to this broader age of blurred categories. Then comes the Younger Dryas, a cold and dry climatic reversal that begins around 12,900 years ago and lasts for more than a millennium. Its effects vary by region, and archaeologists continue to discuss exactly how it influences human decisions in southeastern Anatolia. It does not explain everything, and no single climate event can be treated as the master key to civilization, yet it forms part of the background. In a world where familiar resources become less predictable, gathering together may carry new importance. Ceremonies may reinforce alliances, feasts may redistribute food, shared labour may turn strangers or distant kin into partners. A hilltop monument may become a way of holding society together when the landscape itself is shifting beneath human expectation. The animals carved later into the pillars are born from this world of movement and attention. They are not symbolic inventions detached from daily life. the fox slipping through the grass, the snake near stone and heat, the boar in thickets, the crane in wetlands or seasonal roots, the vulture circling high above open ground, all belong to the environment that surrounds human thought. To carve them is not merely to decorate. It is to fix elements of the living landscape into a place where people gather. Their presence suggests a society that sees animals not only as food, but as powers, signs, companions, threats, and carriers of meaning. The exact beliefs remain beyond reach, but the link between environment and imagination is visible in stone. So before the pillars rise fully in the story, the world around them must be understood as active, not passive. Climate changes, plants shift, herds pass, stone waits in the ridge. Human groups move across the terrain with knowledge inherited over generations. The old ice age is ending, but it does not end cleanly. It leaves behind uncertainty, abundance, danger, and opportunity woven together. In that unstable borderland, the first great mystery of Göbekli Tepe becomes easier to feel. Though not easy to solve, the builders do not appear from nowhere. They emerge from a landscape that teaches them patience, cooperation, memory, and return. The hill is not yet a monument, but already it gathers possibilities beneath its surface. The people who come to the hill are not villagers in the later sense, and they are not citizens of anything that could be called a state. They do not live under palace walls, do not pay taxes in grain, do not leave clay tablets listing workers, rations, or offerings, yet it becomes increasingly difficult to describe them as simple wanderers. The old image of small, loose bands moving lightly through the landscape, concerned only with the next meal, cannot explain the scale of what appears at Göbekli Tepe. A monument like this begins long before the first stone is raised. It begins in shared memory, in repeated returns, in decisions made across families or groups, in the ability to persuade people that the work matters. Stone pillars do not cut themselves from limestone. They do not move uphill by accident. They do not stand in carefully arranged spaces unless human minds have already formed a plan strong enough to outlast hunger, fatigue, disagreement, and the pull of ordinary life. These builders belong to a world where knowledge is carried in bodies and voices rather than written records. Their maps are not scratched onto parchment. They are remembered in routes, landmarks, water sources, animal paths, and the feel of seasons. A person growing up in this landscape learns where wild cereals ripen first, where flint nodules lie in the rock, where gazelle may pass, where snakes warm themselves, and where a ridge can be seen against the sky from a long distance. Such knowledge is not primitive. It is precise, local, inherited, and constantly tested. A wrong reading of weather, a missed migration, or a failed gathering season has real consequences. The people who build Göbekli Tepe likely live within networks of this practical intelligence, and the monument suggests that those networks are also social and symbolic. The hill is not simply used, it is recognized. Archaeology can see them only indirectly. Their bodies are mostly absent, their language is gone, their songs, stories, kinship rules, and ceremonies leave no direct trace. What remains are stone tools, carved pillars, animal bones, grinding stones, architecture, sediments, and the pattern of repeated activity. From these traces, a picture forms, but it is never complete. Scholars still debate how mobile the builders were, whether some groups lived near the site for longer parts of the year, and how often people gathered there. Still, what survives in the records suggests coordination beyond a single household or a passing camp. It suggests people able to plan, return, remember unfinished work, and maintain a shared purpose through time. One of the lesser-known but important details is that the labour at Göbekli Tepe does not necessarily require a huge population in the way later pyramids or city walls do. Experiments and estimates suggest that with enough organisation, teams of determined people using stone tools, ropes made from plant fibres or hides, wooden levers, and packed earth could quarry and move large limestone pillars. This does not make the achievement less remarkable. It makes it more human. The mystery is not that the builders needed impossible technology. They did not. The mystery is that they chose to devote time and energy to such work at all, while still living in a world where food remains wild, storage is limited, and survival depends on seasonal success. The feat is not supernatural, it is social. The people on the hill may gather in groups larger than those of daily life. Distant communities may come together for ceremonies, exchanges, marriages, hunts, repairs, feasts, or obligations that modern archaeology can only partially detect. In such gatherings, the monument becomes a stage for identity. People who usually move across separate territories can meet under the gaze of the same carved animals. They can share food, renew alliances, compete for prestige, mourn the dead, display skill, and teach the young what belongs to memory. No single explanation fully accounts for this, but the site's scale makes sense only if the hill has importance beyond routine subsistence. It is a place where people do something together because togetherness itself has power. This matters because hunter-gatherer societies are often imagined as necessarily egalitarian and small-scale. Many are more equal than later agricultural states, but equality is never the same as simplicity. Human groups can recognize talented hunters, ritual specialists, elders, healers, negotiators, carvers, memory keepers, and people with unusual charisma. Authority can be temporary, situational, or ceremonial rather than permanent. A person may lead a hunt but not command a household. Another may know the correct sequence of a rite but hold no power over food. At Göbekli Tepe, the evidence remains incomplete, yet the monument hints at roles that are not visible in ordinary tool scatters. Someone knows how the pillars should face. Someone understands which animals belong on which stone. Someone can organize labor without a king's seal or a soldier's threat. The carvings themselves point towards specialized knowledge. The animals are not crude marks made in idle time. Many are carefully placed, raised in relief, and integrated into the shape of the pillars. The T-shaped forms carry human-like features, but with faces withheld. Arms descend along the sides. Hands meet near the front. Belts and garments appear on some stones. These details suggest that the pillars may represent beings rather than mere supports. Though scholars still debate what kind of beings they are, ancestors, spirits, powerful persons, mythic figures, or symbolic humans have all been proposed. The absence of faces may be deliberate, and that absence is part of their force. They are human enough to be recognized, but not individual enough to be named by archaeology. To create such forms, the builders need more than strength. They need a shared visual language. A fox carved into limestone means something to those who see it. A snake cluster means something. A vulture, a scorpion, a boar, a crane, and a headless human image do not float as random decoration. Their meanings may shift by clan, season, ritual, or enclosure, but their repeated presence suggests a symbolic world with rules. Modern observers can admire the art, but the original viewers may have read it with a fluency now lost. They may have known which animal warns, which protects, which remembers the dead, which belongs to a lineage, which marks a story, which stands for a dangerous force in the landscape. What survives is the carved surface. What is missing is the system of meaning that made the surface alive. In this way, Göbekli Tepe does not show the sudden birth of complexity. It reveals complexity already present. The builders carry with them a deep inheritance from older humans who painted caves, buried the dead, shaped ornaments, made music, tracked animals, crossed seas, and told stories under vanished skies. The hill does not mark the moment when imagination begins. It marks a moment when imagination becomes architectural, belief, memory, and social obligation are given weight, height, and a fixed place in the landscape. The people who raise the pillars may still follow wild herds and harvest wild plants, but they are also capable of creating a monument that changes how later ages understand them. They stand at the edge of agriculture, but they are not waiting to become fully human through farming. They're already human in the most demanding sense, able to gather around a mystery, carve it into stone, and leave it behind for a future that can see the work but not hear the meaning. The pillars begin in the bedrock before they become monuments. They are not brought from some distant mountain, not carried across impossible distances by a forgotten technology, not lifted by machinery lost to time. They come from the limestone of the hill itself and from nearby outcrops, where the ground offers broad, workable surfaces to people who know how stone fractures. This fact does not make their creation ordinary. It makes the achievement more intimate. The builders are not imposing a monument on a passive landscape. They're cutting the monument out of the same ridge on which it will stand. The hill gives up its own body, and human hands turn that body into upright forms that seem almost alive. To quarry a pillar, the builders first need to recognize the right stone. Limestone can be soft enough to work compared with harder rocks, but it is still stone, and a mistake can ruin weeks of effort. They likely mark a shape on the exposed surface, then begin cutting channels around it with flint tools, hammer stones, and patient repetition. The work is slow, percussive, physical. Edges are struck, scraped, and deepened. Dust gathers. Chips scatter across the quarry floor. The sound is not the metallic ringing of later bronze or iron tools, but the dull, hard rhythm of stone against stone. Some unfinished pillars found near the site give modern researchers a rare glimpse into this process. One large unfinished piece remains attached to the bedrock, a silent accident or abandonment that shows the monument halfway between geology and architecture. It is one of the most revealing traces at Göbekli Tepe, because it proves that the builders are capable of planning enormous forms directly from the living rock. Once cut free, a pillar must be shaped. The T-form is not a random convenience. The broad horizontal top and long vertical shaft appear again and again, strongly enough to suggest a shared design tradition. These stones are usually described as T-shaped pillars, but that term can sound abstract. In the enclosures, they feel more like bodies. Some carry carved arms along their sides, hands near the front, belts, and garment-like details. The head is present as a form, but the face is missing. This combination gives them a strange authority. They're not statues in the later sense, not portraits, not gods with readable expressions. They are human-like presences reduced to the essential outline of a being that stands, watches, and receives the surrounding animal images without ever looking back. Carving such a pillar requires several stages of skill. The rough block must be separated from bedrock, trimmed, flattened, and given its final proportions. Relief images must be cut so that the surrounding stone is lowered and the animal or symbol remains raised. This is demanding work. It takes control, planning, and the ability to imagine a finished image while removing material that cannot be replaced. Some carvings are shallow and spare, others have surprising depth and energy. A fox appears with a long body and pointed muzzle. A snake flows downward. A boar holds its compact force. The surfaces show that the makers understand both the material and the creatures they represent. What survives in the record suggests experienced hands, perhaps people who have learned carving traditions long before the largest enclosures are completed. Then comes the movement of the stones. This is where the imagination often leaps toward mystery, but the real difficulty is already powerful enough. Pillars weighing several tons must be shifted from quarry zones to their positions in the enclosures. The distances may not be vast, yet even a short movement matters when the load is huge and the tools are simple. The builders may use wooden sledges, rollers, levers, ropes made from plant fibers or animal hide, packed earth ramps, and teams of people pulling in coordinated rhythm. Exact methods remain debated because the organic materials that would prove them have vanished. Still, nothing in the known evidence requires lost machinery or impossible engineering. The deeper puzzle is how people are assembled, fed, motivated, and directed to perform the work again and again. Labour leaves traces, but not always the ones modern eyes expect. There are no payroll lists, no overseer seals, no carved boast from a ruler claiming responsibility. Instead, the coordination must be inferred from architecture itself. Each enclosure reflects planning. Pillars are set into sockets or carefully prepared spaces. Walls curve around them. Central pairs dominate the interior. Smaller pillars line the perimeter. The arrangement implies a shared concept before the work begins. Someone, or some group, must know the intended form. Someone must decide where the enclosure opens, how large it should be, which stones belong at the centre, which animals belong on the surfaces, and when the work is complete enough for use. Scholars still debate whether this direction comes from ritual specialists, respected elders, skilled builders, competitive groups, or temporary leaders whose authority exists only during gatherings. The evidence remains incomplete, but the architecture itself proves that collective action has become disciplined. The raising of a pillar may be the most dramatic moment in the building process. A stone lying on the ground belongs partly to the world of tools and labour. A stone standing upright belongs to another order. To lift it, the builders likely use earthen ramps, ropes, levers, and careful control of balance. The base must be guided into place. The shaft must not crack. The people pulling and pushing must act together. Because one failure can injure bodies and destroy work that took many days or weeks. When the pillar finally stands, it changes the space around it. It casts a shadow. It becomes visible over human heads. It turns the enclosure from a construction zone into a charged interior. The stone is no longer just heavy, it is present. A lesser-known aspect of Göbekli Tepe is that its architecture is not frozen in one perfect moment. The site changes over time. Enclosures are built, used, modified, filled, and replaced. Later structures are often smaller and somewhat different from the earliest monumental spaces. This suggests a tradition that evolves, not a single act of sudden genius. The builders return to the hill across generations, carrying forward forms that can be repeated but also altered. That continuity may be one reason the site feels so haunting. It is not the work of one day, one leader, or one ceremony. It is a long investment in place, renewed until the hill becomes layered with memory. The pillars rise then, because the society around them has already learned to transform effort into meaning. Every stage requires cooperation finding stone, cutting it, shaping it, moving it, lifting it, carving it, maintaining the enclosure around it. The work binds people not only to the monument, but to one another. In a world before written contracts or royal commands, shared belief may be one of the strongest tools available. The limestone pillars stand as proof that human communities can organize around something invisible in obligation, a story, a ritual need, a fear, a memory, a promise to the dead, or a vision of order in a changing world. No single explanation fully accounts for the power of these stones. Yet once they stand in their circles, facing inward beneath the open sky, the old idea of what hunter-gatherers could or could not do is permanently weakened. The animals appear as if they have climbed out of the surrounding world and entered the stone before the people vanish. They move across the pillars in relief, sharp and deliberate, sometimes alone, sometimes crowded together in strange arrangements that refuse to become a simple story. A fox stretches along the side of a pillar with its narrow body and pointed face. Snakes descend like living lines, their forms easy to carve but hard to dismiss. Wild boars carry a compact menace, thick with muscle and bristle. Birds stand with long necks and alert postures. Scorpions, spiders, vultures, aurochs, and other creatures appear in a visual language that must once have been understood by those who gathered there. To modern eyes, they are among the most powerful clues at Göbekli Tepe, but also among the most frustrating. They are vivid enough to feel meaningful, yet silent enough to resist translation. These are not the animals of a domesticated world. There are no calm cattle under human control, no sheep folded neatly into pens, no scenes of ploughing, milking, harvesting, or household labour. The carved creatures belong to a wild landscape, and many carry danger. The fox is clever and elusive. The snake is close to the ground, hidden, sudden, and often feared. The boar is unpredictable and strong enough to injure or kill. The scorpion belongs to the dry places where a careless hand can meet pain. The vulture circles above death and exposed flesh. The aurochs, ancestor of domestic cattle, is not a barn animal, but a massive wild power, taller and more dangerous than later cattle, an animal that commands respect from anyone who hunts or merely encounters it. What survives in the record suggests that the builders are not celebrating peaceful control over nature. They're giving form to a world that remains alive, dangerous and spiritually charged. The carvings also show how closely these people observe living things. The forms are stylized, but they are not ignorant. A person who carves a fox with that lean-forward energy has watched foxes. A person who cuts the curve of a snake or the body of a boar understands the animal as more than a symbol in the abstract. This is one of the quiet strengths of hunter-gatherer art across the deep past. It often carries knowledge born from attention. The animals are known through tracks, movement, season, meat, hide, threat, habit, and story. At Göbekli Tepe, that knowledge is transferred onto pillars that may themselves represent human-like beings. The effect is unsettling. The human forms stand without faces, while animals swarm over them with identity and motion. The human is monumental and silent. The animal is specific and alive. Scholars still debate what the animal imagery means, and the evidence remains incomplete. Some interpretations see the creatures as clan emblems or group identities, marking the presence of different communities that gather at the hill. Others suggest they are tied to myths, rituals, hunting symbolism, death practices, protective forces, or dangerous beings that must be acknowledged within sacred space. It is possible that the same animal carries different meanings in different contexts. A fox may be a lineage sign in one enclosure, a mythic trickster in another, or a creature associated with a seasonal ceremony now lost. Modern categories may divide religion, art, ecology, and social identity too sharply. For the builders, these meanings may have been braided together. One famous pillar, often discussed because of its dense imagery, carries a combination of creatures and signs that has encouraged many interpretations. Vultures, a scorpion, abstract symbols, and a headless human figure have been linked by some researchers to death, excarnation, or the journey of the dead. In parts of the ancient Near East, and in some later ritual traditions elsewhere, birds that consume bodies can become connected with transformation, exposure, or the passage from life into another state. Yet caution is necessary. Göbekli Tepe leaves no text explaining the scene. No single explanation fully accounts for the imagery, and some popular claims go far beyond the evidence, turning the carvings into star maps, catastrophe records, or coded messages with a certainty archaeology cannot support. The safer conclusion is also the more haunting one. Death and animal power may be present together in the symbolism, but the original grammar of that symbolism has been lost. The placement of animals matters as much as their presence. They are not scattered randomly like casual marks on a rock face. Some appear on the broad faces of pillars, some along narrow sides, some near belts or arm-like carvings, some in clusters that suggest intentional relationships. This means the enclosures are not empty rooms decorated after construction. They are designed visual environments. A person entering one of these spaces does not simply see architecture. They enter a field of presences. Human-like pillars stand in the centre. Animals occupy the stone around them. Walls curve and enclose the scene. The sky remains open above. In such a place, the boundaries between landscape, body, memory, and ritual may become deliberately blurred. There is also an absence that speaks quietly. Many of the animals most important to daily food remains are not always the most dominant in the carvings. Archaeological deposits show heavy use of wild game, especially gazelle in some contexts, along with other species consumed by the people who gathered there. Yet the carved imagery often favours predators, scavengers, venomous creatures, and symbolically intense animals rather than simple menus of food. This suggests that the carvings are not merely records of diet. They belong to another order of meaning. The people eat animals, hunt animals, fear animals, follow animals, and think with animals. In the stone, creatures become more than resources. They become signs through which human communities understand danger, death, identity, and perhaps the unseen forces around them. The animal world at Göbekli Tepe may also reflect the tension of an age in transition. These are the final centuries before agriculture begins to reshape relationships between humans and other species in a permanent way. Soon, in nearby regions and across many generations, certain animals will be domesticated, bred, confined, and transformed. Plants will be brought closer to human settlements. Landscapes will be cleared, managed, and claimed. But the carvings on the hill belong to the older relationship, when humans face the wild not as masters, but as participants within it. The animals are not below them. They surround them. They may even judge them, guide them, threaten them, or connect them to the dead. That is why the carvings still feel alive after 12 millennia. Their technical beauty matters, but their deeper power lies in the lost seriousness behind them. The builders choose these creatures carefully. They cut them into pillars that require immense labour. They place them in spaces where people gather for reasons that are still debated. The animals become the surviving vocabulary of a vanished mental world. Archaeology can name the species, trace the tool marks, compare motifs, and map their positions. But it cannot fully recover the stories that once made a snake terrifying in one way, a fox meaningful in another, a vulture sacred or ominous in another. The stone preserves the image and withholds the explanation. In that gap, the hill keeps its force. The strangest thing about Göbekli Tepe is not simply that it is old, or that its pillars are large, or that animals stare from its stone surfaces with a force that still survives the loss of their meaning. The deeper disturbance lies in what is missing around it. A monument this ambitious is expected to sit inside a settled world. Later temples belong to cities, towns, villages, priesthoods, storehouses, courtyards, houses, streets, workshops, and graves. They rise within communities that have already fixed themselves to a place. At Göbekli Tepe, the picture is different. The great enclosures appear before there is clear evidence of a dense permanent town surrounding them. The hill holds monumental architecture, but not the ordinary architecture of a large settled population. It offers sacred or ceremonial space without the familiar domestic frame that archaeology once expected to find beside it. This absence is not absolute emptiness. People are certainly present at the site, and they return repeatedly over long periods. They leave behind tools, animal bones, debris, stone chips, and traces of building, use, modification, and burial. They work there, gather there, eat there, carve there, and perhaps perform rites there. But the earliest monumental enclosures do not look like the heart of a normal village. They are not clusters of homes built for everyday sleeping, cooking, storage, and family life. Their design points inward toward the central pillars. Their scale and symbolism point beyond routine shelter. The architecture seems to separate certain activities from ordinary living, even if those activities depend on people coming together in large numbers. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives in the record suggests a place set apart. That distinction matters because older archaeological models placed religious monumentality after settlement. The logic seemed practical and persuasive. Farming ties people to fields. Fields create villages. Villages grow, produce surplus, and support specialists. Specialists build temples and organize rituals. In that sequence, sacred architecture becomes a result of economic change. Göbekli Tepe complicates the order. It suggests that large-scale ritual spaces may emerge among communities still heavily dependent on hunting, gathering, and wild plants. This does not mean the builders have no fixed places at all, or that they drift randomly across the landscape. It means the relationship between settlement, food production, and monumental belief is more tangled than a simple staircase from survival to civilization. The word temple is tempting, but it carries danger. To call Göbekli Tepe a temple makes the site easier to imagine, but it also imports later ideas that may not belong there. Later temples often have named gods, priestly classes, offerings, property, and institutional authority. Göbekli Tepe has no texts. It gives no divine names. It leaves no hymns, no ritual instructions, no official account of who is allowed inside or what happens there. If it is a temple, it is a temple from a world before the word temple has its later meaning. If it is a sanctuary, a ceremonial center, a gathering place, an ancestral space, or something that combines all of these, modern language can only circle around it. Scholars still debate the best term because the building itself survives more clearly than the social category it once belonged to. The enclosures are also not uniform halls of worship in any simple sense. They have circular or oval plans, stone walls, benches or ledges in some areas, surrounding pillars, and larger central pairs. Their form creates a controlled interior. A person inside is surrounded by stone beings and carved animals, while the outside world remains close but partially excluded. This is not the architecture of defense. It is not meant to keep an army out. It is not a granary designed for storage. It is not a house designed around hearth and family. It is architecture for gathering attention. Everything seems to draw the eye toward presence, arrangement, and symbol. The people who enter may be stepping into a space where the normal landscape has been remade into a concentrated version of itself. One lesser-known point is that even the floors and construction surfaces show care. Some enclosures include prepared floors, sometimes described as terrazzo-like or made from compacted lime materials, though details vary across the site and phases. Such surfaces require effort beyond simply clearing ground. They suggest that the interior experience matters. The builders want controlled space underfoot as well as upright stone around the body. This kind of investment does not fit well with the idea of a casual meeting place used only once or twice. It suggests repeated use, maintenance, and memory. Yet again, the site does not present itself as an ordinary settlement. The result is a paradox: permanence without normal domesticity, heavy architecture without a visible town, placemaking before full village life takes the expected form. The missing town also forces a different way of thinking about social geography. The people who build and use Göbekli Tepe may not need to live permanently beside it for it to be central to their world. A place can be powerful because people return to it from many directions. Seasonal gathering sites, pilgrimage places, ancestral grounds, hunting aggregation sites, and exchange centres can shape society even if most daily life happens elsewhere. In such a system, the hill is not a city centre but a social magnet. Its importance lies in recurrence. Groups may spend much of the year apart and then converge at appointed times, bringing food, stories, marriage ties, rivalries, obligations, and memories. The monument becomes the fixed point around which a wider mobile world can organise itself. This possibility helps explain how something so large can exist without a surrounding town. Labour may be seasonal, people may arrive when resources allow, when herds pass nearby, when wild plants can be harvested, or when ritual calendars demand return. They may work for days or weeks, then leave. They may come back across generations to repair, alter, bury, or replace enclosures. No single explanation fully accounts for the pattern, but the absence of a city does not mean absence of society. It may reveal a different kind of society, one whose centre is not permanent residence but repeated assembly. The hill therefore unsettles the definition of civilization itself. If civilization is measured only by cities, writing, government, and farming, Göbekli Tepe stands outside it. If civilization is also measured by the ability to create shared symbols, organize large labor, build enduring spaces, and bind communities through meanings beyond immediate survival, then something deeply civilizational is already present. The builders do not yet live in the world of kings and scribes, but they're not outside history. They are making a form of history that later categories struggle to hold. Their monument is a temple without a town, or perhaps a town's spiritual ancestor before the town has fully gathered around it. It stands at the moment when place becomes powerful enough to pull people back, even before fields and walls make staying permanent. That is why the contradiction remains so sharp. Göbekli Tepe is not merely early, it is early in the wrong way. And because of that, it forces the beginning of civilization to become stranger, older, and more human than it once appeared. If the hill is not a town, then something else must draw people there with enough force to make stone. Labour and memory converge. One of the most persuasive clues is not hidden in the pillars themselves, but scattered in the debris around them: animal bones, broken tools, grinding equipment, stone vessels, and the residues of repeated human gatherings. The sacred or ceremonial force of Göbekli Tepe may have been carried not only by silence, carving, and awe, but by food. The hill may have been a place where people came together to eat on a scale larger than ordinary daily life, turning feasting into one of the engines of cooperation. It is an idea both simple and profound, because before people can raise pillars together, they must first stay together long enough to work, and nothing holds a gathering in the human world quite like shared food. The animal bones from Göbekli Tepe point strongly toward wild resources. Gazelle appear in large numbers, along with aurochs, wild boar, deer, onager, birds, and other species. These are not the remains of domesticated herds quietly managed beside a village. They come from hunting, from the surrounding landscape, from the skills of people who understand animal movements and know how to bring meat back to a gathering place. The scale of consumption suggests more than a few families eating ordinary meals. It hints at events, perhaps seasonal, perhaps ritual, perhaps tied to construction, burial, initiation, alliance, or memory. Scholars still debate the exact rhythm of these gatherings, but what survives in the record suggests that the hill is repeatedly supplied with food by people who know how to mobilize both labor and meat. Feasting is easy to underestimate because it can sound secondary beside architecture. Stone seems permanent, while food vanishes. Yet in many human societies, feasts are among the most powerful social tools. A feast can settle obligations, display generosity, create debt, mark belonging, honor the dead, celebrate success, and transform strangers into participants in the same event. It can also create competition, a group that provides more food, better meat, rarer ingredients, or more impressive hospitality may gain prestige. At Göbekli Tepe, such dynamics may help explain why people are willing to invest energy in construction that does not directly increase the day's calories. The monument and the feast may reinforce one another. The pillars give the gathering meaning, the feast gives the gathering body. The labor of building itself may require feasting, to quarry, carve, drag, and raise pillars. People need calories, coordination, and motivation. Food can become payment without coin, obligation without contract, celebration without writing. Hunters may bring gazelle and aurochs from the surrounding lands. Gatherers may bring wild grains, nuts, fruits, and other plant foods. Skilled toolmakers, carvers, and ritual specialists may be fed while their work continues. Families may contribute according to ability. A successful feast proves that a community can gather resources on a large scale, and that proof may matter as much as the meal. No single explanation fully accounts for the site, but feasting offers a practical bridge between belief and labor. It turns ritual imagination into something people can taste. The plant evidence is more delicate because plants decay more easily than bone and stone. Still, grinding stones and other tools show that wild cereals and plant foods are part of the wider world of the site. In the broader region, people already know how to gather and process and consume wild grains long before fully domesticated crops dominate daily life. They grind seeds, crack husks, prepare meals, and perhaps produce gruels, breads, or fermented drinks in certain contexts. Some researchers have suggested that large stone vessels at Göbekli Tepe may have been used in the preparation of beverages, possibly including early forms of beer made from wild cereals, though the evidence remains debated and should not be treated as settled fact. Even as a possibility, it reveals the importance of plant processing in gatherings that are too often imagined only in terms of meat. A feast on the hill would not be a casual picnic. It would be an event embedded in effort and expectation. Meat must be hunted, butchered, carried, cooked, and distributed. Grains must be harvested at the right moment, transported, ground, soaked, heated, or otherwise prepared. Water must be found and brought. Fires must be maintained. Tools must be sharpened. Skins, baskets, wooden implements, and containers may be used and then disappear from the record. The visible remains are only the hard fragments of a much larger world of labour. What survives in the soil is the afterimage of activity bones split and discarded, stone tools worn by use, grinding equipment left behind, sediments changed by repeated human presence. There is a human intimacy in this evidence that the pillars alone cannot provide. The stones show ambition, but the bones and food remain show bodies gathered in time. People sit, stand, carry, cut, roast, grind, wait, eat, and watch. Children may be present at the edges of ceremonies, learning the smell of smoke and cooked meat before they understand the meanings of the carved animals. Elders may remember earlier gatherings, earlier pillars, earlier hunts, earlier deaths. Visitors from distant groups may measure one another through generosity and restraint. Alliances may be renewed not through written treaties, but through the shared consumption of food in a place where memory has been made visible in limestone. Feasting also helps explain how a society without permanent kings might still organize large projects. Authority can be created through giving. A person or group able to sponsor a feast may gain influence, not by commanding in the later state sense, but by attracting people into obligation. The one who feeds others may become difficult to refuse. The group that provides meat for a ceremony may win prestige. The community that helps raise a pillar may later claim a relationship with the enclosure it helped create. These are not proven details, and scholars still debate the social structure behind the site. But feasting makes it possible to imagine power emerging through generosity, competition, and ritual duty rather than through formal rule. The seasonal setting may be crucial. If people gather when gazelle are abundant, wild grains are ripe, or weather makes movement easier, the hill becomes tied to cycles of the land. Ritual time and ecological time may overlap. The animals carved into stone, the animals hunted for food, and the animals moving through the surrounding country all become part of the same seasonal rhythm. The monument does not stand outside nature. It concentrates nature into ceremony. Even the act of eating wild creatures beneath pillars covered in wild creatures may carry meanings that modern archaeology can sense but not fully recover. In this way, the feast may be one of the hidden foundations of the mystery. Göbekli Tepe is not only a place where people look upward at stones, it is a place where they gather in the practical, messy, powerful reality of human bodies needing food and finding meaning in sharing it. The same hands that carve foxes may cut meat. The same people who drag limestone may grind wild grain. The same gathering that honors unseen powers may also bind living communities through abundance and effort. The hill becomes a place where survival is transformed into ceremony, and ceremony feeds the social world that makes survival possible. Long before cities store grain in temples or kings sponsor public rituals, people on this limestone ridge may already understand that a shared meal can build more than strength. It can build memory, obligation, and the first outlines of a world larger than the campfire. The question of farming waits behind every stone at Göbekli Tepe, not because the hill is covered in fields, but because it stands so close to the moment when fields begin to change human history forever. For generations, archaeology told the story in a familiar direction. People learned to cultivate plants and manage animals, and only after that did they gather in larger settlements, create surplus, support specialists, and build monuments. Food production came first, temples came later. Göbekli Tepe makes that sequence less comfortable. Its earliest monumental enclosures seem to rise at a time when the people using the hill still depend heavily on wild animals and wild plants. The site, therefore, places a difficult possibility in front of archaeology, perhaps the pull toward ritual centres, repeated gatherings, feasts, and obligations helped push human communities toward farming, rather than farming simply making ritual monuments possible. This does not mean that Göbekli Tepe single-handedly invents agriculture. No careful scholar would reduce the Neolithic transformation to one hill, one ceremony, or one sacred place. Farming emerges over many generations across a broad region, through experiments that differ from valley to valley and community to community. People do not wake one morning and become farmers. They gather wild grains, return to productive stands, protect useful plants, scatter seeds accidentally or deliberately, clear competing vegetation, harvest at certain times, store small amounts, and slowly alter the conditions in which plants grow. The biological signs of domestication, such as tougher seed attachments in cereals that make harvesting easier for humans but dispersal harder for the plant, appear gradually. The evidence remains incomplete in many places, but it shows a long transition rather than a sudden invention. The landscape around Göbekli Tepe sits near regions that later become crucial to early agriculture. Wild relatives of wheat grow in the broader uplands, and the Karakadar area to the north has often been discussed in relation to the ancestry of domesticated einkorn wheat. This is one of the striking details that gives the hill its wider significance. The builders are not living in a random wilderness far from agricultural potential. They occupy a world where useful plants are already close, familiar, and seasonally abundant. They may not yet farm them in the full later sense, but they know them intimately. They know where grains ripen, how they must be cut, how they can be ground, how long they last, and how much work is required to turn wild seeds into food for a gathering. In such a world, ritual demand can change practical behavior. If people gather at the hill in large numbers, they need food in larger quantities than ordinary daily life requires. A small family group can survive by moving through a seasonal round, but a ceremonial gathering draws many mouths to one place. Feasts, construction projects, and repeated assemblies create pressure. Meat can be hunted, but hunts are unpredictable. Wild grains can be gathered. But gathering enough for major events requires planning. If a place becomes important enough that people return again and again, the desire to feed those gatherings may encourage more intensive harvesting, storage, and eventually cultivation near reliable zones. No single explanation fully accounts for this, but ritual can create appetite beyond hunger. It can make abundance socially necessary. This is why Göbekli Tepe has been linked to the idea that religion or ritual may have helped drive the Neolithic transition. The phrase can be misunderstood. It does not mean belief magically creates farming. It means that social obligations attached to sacred or ceremonial places may encourage people to organize food production in new ways. A community that wants to host a feast must gather more grain. A group that returns to a site at predictable times may begin to manage nearby resources more carefully. People who invest labour in permanent stone may also become more attached to certain landscapes. Over time, returning to a sacred hill can make staying nearby more attractive, and staying nearby can make cultivation more useful. Ritual and subsistence begin to pull on each other. The opposite interpretation remains possible as well. Perhaps early forms of cultivation and increasing settlement already exist in the background, giving people enough stability to build Göbekli Tepe. The site may not precede all agricultural experimentation, but stand within a broader zone where human communities are already intensifying their use of plants and landscapes. In this view, the monument is not the cause of farming, but one expression of the same changing world that produces farming. People become more settled, their social networks grow denser, their food practices shift, and their symbolic architecture becomes larger at the same time. Scholars still debate the balance between these forces because the evidence does not line up in a neat sequence. Different sites preserve different parts of the transformation, and the earliest phases are often the hardest to see clearly. Part of the difficulty lies in separating cultivation from domestication. Cultivation is behavior. Domestication is biological change. People can cultivate wild plants for a long time before those plants show the physical traits archaeologists recognize as domesticated. They can harvest wild cereals intensively, sow seeds, or tend stands without leaving obvious domesticated grains in the record. This means that a site may appear pre-agricultural in one sense while still belonging to a world of plant management in another. Göbekli Tepe sits exactly in that ambiguous zone. Its animal bones strongly emphasize hunting, and there is no simple picture of a farming village at the earliest monumental phases. Yet the broader region is alive with the practices that will eventually lead to agriculture. The boundary is not a wall, it is a long, uneven threshold. The same is true for animals. The carved creatures at Göbekli Tepe belong to the wild world, and the food remains point toward hunted game rather than domestic herds. Yet animal domestication also emerges in the wider Neolithic world through a slow reshaping of relationships. Humans begin by hunting, tracking, culling, corralling, tolerating, managing, and eventually breeding certain species. Sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs each follow different paths. And not all are domesticated in exactly the same place or at the same moment. At Göbekli Tepe, the powerful wild aurochs carved in stone and consumed in feasts belongs to a time before cattle are reduced into herd animals. The wild still dominates both diet and imagination. That makes the site feel like a final great monument of the hunter's world, even as the farmer's world gathers just beyond it. There is something almost tragic in this overlap. The people who gather at the hill may be helping create the conditions for a future they do not fully intend. By returning to fixed places, intensifying food collection, feeding larger groups, and investing meaning in particular landscapes, they may be taking steps towards settlement and agriculture. But agriculture will bring consequences no one on the hill can measure: population growth, disease transmission, harder labour, property, inheritance, inequality, territorial conflict, and new forms of dependence on crops that can fail. Farming is not simply progress. It is a transformation with costs as well as advantages. The people at Göbekli Tepe stand before that transformation, still surrounded by wild animals in stone, still fed by wild herds and wild grains, yet already drawn into patterns that make the old mobility harder to sustain. The farming question therefore remains one of the deepest reasons the site haunts archaeology. It refuses to let survival and belief be separated neatly. Food is practical, but it is also social. Ritual is symbolic, but it also demands calories, labour, storage, and return. The hill shows people gathering before full agriculture dominates their lives, and those gatherings may be part of the very pressure that makes agriculture useful. Or the first experiments in plant management may already be feeding the gatherings that make the hill possible. The order is still debated, and perhaps the search for a single first cause is itself too simple. At Göbekli Tepe, belief and bread, stone and seed. Hunting and harvest all belong to the same unfolding change. Civilization may not begin when humans choose farming over ritual, or ritual over farming. It may begin in the uneasy space where the two become impossible to separate. Death is never far from the hill, even when no complete cemetery lies open at its centre. The great pillars stand in silence, the animals remain fixed in stone, and the evidence of feasting scatters through the soil. But beneath these traces there is another presence, quieter and more difficult to read. Human remains at Göbekli Tepe are fragmentary. They do not form a neat burial ground that explains itself. They appear in pieces, in disturbed contexts, in ways that suggest the dead may have been treated through practices very different from later graves, with bodies laid carefully beneath floors or in cemeteries outside settlements. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives in the record hints that the hill may have been linked not only to gathering and food, but to memory, ancestors, and the transformation of the human body after death. One of the most striking clues comes from skull fragments. Some human skull pieces found at the site show cut marks, modifications, and signs that they may have been handled after death. Researchers have suggested that certain skulls were intentionally worked, perhaps suspended, displayed, or otherwise used in ritual. The details are debated, and caution is necessary because fragmentary bones can be difficult to interpret. Cut marks may come from defleshing, cleaning, preparation, or other practices whose meanings are not automatically clear. Yet the skull holds a special place in many prehistoric and early Neolithic societies across the Near East. In later sites, human heads are sometimes removed, curated, plastered, painted, buried separately, or kept within domestic and ritual spaces. Göbekli Tepe may belong to an earlier or related world in which the head carries a significance that the rest of the body does not. The skull is an intimate and unsettling object because it preserves identity and erases it at the same time. A living face is memory, recognition, kinship, emotion, and social presence. After death, the skull remains as the hard architecture of that face, stripped of expression but still shaped like a person. To handle a skull is to handle both absence and survival. For the people of the hill, a human head may represent an ancestor, an enemy, a ritual participant, a powerful dead person, or a being whose identity changes after death. Scholars still debate these possibilities, and no single explanation fully accounts for the evidence. But the modified fragments suggest that the dead are not simply disposed of and forgotten. They may be brought into ceremonies, displayed in relation to pillars, or woven into the social identity of groups who return to the site. This possibility changes the feeling of the enclosures. The T-shaped pillars already carry human features without faces, arms, hands, belts, and bodies reduced to stone forms. If skull rituals also occur at or near the site, then Göbekli Tepe becomes a place where human presence is divided between the faceless monumental body and the preserved human head. The relationship may not be accidental. The pillars might represent ancestors, supernatural beings, powerful persons, or generalized human presences that stand beyond individual identity. Skulls, by contrast, may bring particular dead people into the ritual world. The evidence does not allow certainty, but the contrast is haunting. Stone bodies stand forever without faces, while real human heads may be handled, marked, and remembered. Death practices in the early Neolithic Near East are often complex, and they rarely fit modern assumptions about burial as a single final act. In some communities, bodies may be buried, later reopened, and rearranged. Skulls may be removed after decomposition. Bones may be collected, separated, displayed, or reburied. These practices suggest that death is a process, not a moment. A person does not simply vanish from the community when breathing stops. The body changes status through time, and the living may guide that change through ritual action. Göbekli Tepe, with its buried enclosures and strange human imagery, may participate in this broader concern with transformation. The dead may become ancestors, powers, warnings, protectors, or memories fixed to place. A lesser-known detail is that the landscape around Göbekli Tepe includes other sites and traditions where special treatment of the dead appears in different forms. The region does not preserve one uniform death ritual, but a range of practices that show how intensely early communities think about bodies and memory. Later plastered skulls from sites such as Jericho and other Neolithic settlements are more famous, with features modelled over human crania in ways that seem to restore or transform the face. Göbekli Tepe is earlier and different, but it may stand near the beginning of this long fascination with the head as a vessel of identity. What survives in the record suggests a world where the dead remain socially active, not as ghosts in a modern sense, but as presences managed through material remains. If ancestors are involved, then the hill may help bind groups across generations. Mobile or semi-mobile communities face a particular problem of continuity. When people move through landscapes, identity must be carried through stories, roots, objects, rituals, and remembered places. A monumental site offers a fixed anchor, returning to the same enclosure, seeing the same pillars, and perhaps encountering the remains or symbols of the dead can create a lineage of memory that outlasts individual lives. People can say, through action rather than writing, that they belong to those who came before. They can gather where their elders gathered, feed the living where the dead are remembered, and build new stones beside old ones. The hill becomes a memory machine long before writing exists. The animal carvings may also connect to death, vultures, scavengers, and headless human imagery have encouraged interpretations involving exposure of the dead or the separation of flesh from bone. In some environments, bodies may be left for birds and weather before bones are collected, though the evidence for specific practices at Göbekli Tepe remains uncertain. The vulture's presence does not prove a funeral rite by itself, but it does show that creatures associated with death and transformation belong in the site's symbolic world. A vulture is not merely a bird, it is an animal that turns the dead body back into the living landscape. For people who observe nature closely, such a creature may carry deep ritual force. The deliberate burial of enclosures, which comes later in the life of the site, also echoes the treatment of bodies. A structure is built, used, filled, and covered. It is not simply abandoned to weather, it is closed. This does not mean the enclosures are literally treated as corpses, but the pattern suggests that endings matter. The people of Göbekli Tepe may understand closure as an active ritual act, just as a body may pass through stages after death. An enclosure may pass from use into memory through burial. The hill itself becomes layered with dead spaces, sealed stones, and remembered presences. In this way, death does not darken the story from outside. It may stand near the center of the mystery. The builders carve animals that feed on death, raise faceless human pillars, handle skulls or skull fragments, gather in spaces that feel set apart, and eventually bury the very monuments they created. The evidence remains partial, and it would be misleading to claim a complete reconstruction of their beliefs. Yet the surviving traces point toward a society deeply concerned with the relationship between the living, the dead, and the forces that move between them. Göbekli Tepe may not be only a place of feasting or construction. It may be a place where communities learn how to remember, how to transform loss into identity, and how to place their dead within a world of stone, animal, sky, and time. Behind every pillar at Göbekli Tepe stands a society that cannot be seen directly. The stones survive, but the hands that shaped them have vanished. The bones of animals remain, but the voices that organized hunts and feasts are gone. The enclosures reveal planning, labor, and symbolic discipline. Yet the social world that makes such work possible leaves no written names, no titles, no royal seals, no carved list of patrons, no image of a ruler standing above the rest. This absence creates one of the deepest difficulties of the site. Archaeology can measure a pillar, trace a tool mark, identify a species, or map an enclosure wall, but it cannot easily recover how authority works in a world before kings. Still, the hill makes one thing clear. The builders possess social power in some form, even if it is not the power of states. The simplest explanation would be to imagine a chief commanding workers, but this may be too easy and too modern. Leadership does not always begin as permanent rule. In small-scale and mobile societies, authority can be flexible, temporary, earned, or limited to certain situations. One person may lead a hunt because he knows the habits of gazelle. Another may guide a ceremony because she or he remembers the correct sequence of actions. Another may settle disputes, arrange exchanges, organize marriages, prepare pigments, carve stone, or speak for a lineage. Power can move from person to person depending on need. It can appear during a gathering and dissolve when people return to their seasonal roots. The evidence remains incomplete, but Göbekli Tepe suggests that authority here may be powerful without yet becoming government. The construction itself points toward coordinated labor. Someone must decide that a pillar is needed. Someone must know where to quarry it. Someone must gather workers, tools, ropes, food, and time. Someone must judge when the stone is shaped correctly and where it belongs in the enclosure. This does not require a king, but it does require agreement, persuasion, ritual, obligation, or social pressure strong enough to bring people into action. The builders are not forced by written law. They are pulled by something else: belief, prestige, memory, fear, rivalry, duty, or the desire to belong. No single explanation fully accounts for this, yet the result is visible. The society can transform scattered human effort into architecture. Specialization may also exist, though not in the later urban sense. A full-time priesthood or class of professional builders cannot be proven from the evidence at Göbekli Tepe, but the quality of carving suggests experienced makers. Some people likely know stone better than others. Some understand how limestone breaks, how relief is shaped, how pillars are balanced, and how images should be placed. Others may specialize in hunting, plant processing, hide work, tool production, storytelling, healing, or ritual performance. In a world without cities, specialization does not need to mean that a person does only one job for life. It may mean that certain individuals carry rare skills that become especially important during gatherings. Their knowledge gives them status, and their status helps hold the gathering together. Seasonal labor offers another clue. If groups come to the hill at certain times of year, then building becomes part of a rhythm rather than a permanent occupation. People may arrive after successful hunts, during periods when wild grains are available, or when travel is easier. They may work intensely for a short time, feast, perform ceremonies, and then disperse. This kind of labor can create monuments gradually. It also allows people who are not full-time residents to feel ownership of the site. A pillar raised by many hands becomes a shared memory. An enclosure used across generations becomes proof that separate groups can act as one community when the ritual moment arrives. Competition may quietly shape the hill as well. Different groups may sponsor different enclosures, provide different feasts, carve different animals, or attempt to outdo one another in generosity and labor. Such competition need not be destructive. It can build alliances while also creating prestige. A community that brings an aurochs to a feast may gain honor. A lineage associated with a powerful pillar may strengthen its identity. A skilled carver may become known across wide territories. What survives in the record suggests repeated investment, and repeated investment often grows from both devotion and rivalry. Human beings rarely build only because they agree. They also build because they wish to be remembered. This hidden society may be larger than any one camp. Göbekli Tepe seems to draw on networks that reach beyond the hill itself. Similar symbolic forms and related monumental sites in the broader region suggest that communities share ideas across distance. Such sharing requires contact, movement, and communication. People exchange not only stone tools or food, but styles, stories, gestures, and ritual knowledge. The hill may function as one node in a wider web of places where identity is negotiated. In that sense, the builder society is not invisible because it is simple. It is invisible because its most important structures are made of relationships rather than walls. The absence of obvious houses at the earliest monumental levels becomes meaningful again. If daily life is spread across the landscape, then society is not contained in one settlement. It is carried by people who know when to gather and how to separate. Their world may be organized by kinship, seasonal roots, sacred obligations, and remembered places. Later civilization will make authority visible through palaces, fortifications, inscriptions, and tombs. At Göbekli Tepe, authority remains embedded in action. It appears when people quarry stone, prepare food, follow ritual rules, and accept the importance of returning to the same hill. This makes the site more difficult to understand, but also more revealing. It shows that social complexity does not have to look like a state. People can cooperate at impressive scales before bureaucracy. They can create shared symbols before writing. They can recognize leaders before kings. They can build monuments before cities. Scholars still debate how far this complexity reaches, and the evidence does not allow a complete reconstruction of rank, gender, kinship, or ritual office. Yet the pillars are enough to prove that the old categories are too narrow. The builder's society is hidden not because it lacks structure, but because its structure is written in labour, memory, gathering, and stone. On the hill, before the age of rulers, human beings already know how to make others come together around something larger than themselves. At some point, the people of Göbekli Tepe begin to close what they have made. The enclosures that once stand open to sky, ceremony, gathering, and the carved attention of animals are filled with earth, stone, debris, broken tools, and animal bones. The pillars do not simply fall where weather and neglect happen to take them. Many are sealed inside the mound, protected by the very material that hides them. This is one of the most important reasons the site survives so powerfully into the present. Burial preserves the limestone bodies from long exposure, but it also creates a deeper mystery. A society that invests extraordinary labour in quarrying, carving, hauling, and raising these stones later invests more labour in covering them. The hill becomes not only a place of construction, but a place of deliberate closure. Natural abandonment leaves a different signature. Walls collapse unevenly. Stones weather where they stand. Wind and rain slowly bring sediment. Animals burrow. Later people rob useful material. Time breaks things apart in a disorderly way. Göbekli Tepe shows some of those processes too, because no ancient site remains untouched by decay, but the filling of major enclosures appears too extensive and structured to be explained as simple neglect. The spaces are packed with material until the pillars disappear into the mound. This backfilling is not a small act. It requires people to bring debris into the enclosures and deposit it in quantity. The same society, or its descendants, that once organised labour to raise the stones organises labour to bury them. What survives in the record suggests an ending that is not passive. The fill itself is revealing because it contains the refuse of human activity, animal bones, flint debris, stone fragments, sediments, and broken remains from meals, tool-making, and construction. This has led scholars to debate whether the material represents ritual deposition, practical cleanup, the remains of feasts, settlement debris brought from nearby areas, or a mixture of many activities. No single explanation fully accounts for the backfill across the site. Some of it may come from ordinary refuse, but the decision to place it inside monumental enclosures gives it another meaning. Waste is not always meaningless in archaeology. It can become part of closure, memory, and transformation. The same bones left from feasting may help seal a space where earlier gatherings took place. The remains of ordinary life may be used to bury extraordinary architecture. Why close such places at all remains uncertain. One possibility is that the enclosures have life cycles. They may be built, used for a time, lose their active role, and then be ritually retired. In many societies, powerful objects and sacred spaces are not simply thrown away when their use ends. They are buried, broken, burned, hidden, or placed beyond ordinary access. Closure protects people from the object as much as it protects the object from people. If the pillars represent ancestors, spirits, mythic beings, or powerful presences, then leaving them to decay openly may have been inappropriate. Burial may have been the correct ending, a final act that returns the enclosure to the earth while preserving its power below the surface. Another possibility is that burying older enclosures makes room for new forms of activity. Göbekli Tepe changes over time. Later structures are often smaller, and the architectural tradition shifts. The hill does not remain fixed in one monumental phase. As generations pass, people may build over, beside, or into the remains of earlier spaces. Filling an enclosure can stabilize the ground, create a new surface, or incorporate older sacred architecture into the body of the mound. In this sense, burial is both practical and symbolic. The past is not erased, it is made into a foundation. The old stones remain present, but hidden, beneath newer activity. This layered treatment of place is important. A site like Göbekli Tepe may gather power precisely because it accumulates buried memory. The first enclosure is not simply replaced by the second, it remains beneath the hill as a sealed presence. Later visitors may know that older pillars lie below, even if they cannot see them. They may tell stories about them, return because of them, or feel obligations attached to them. Modern archaeology often values visibility, but ancient memory does not always require open display. Sometimes concealment strengthens meaning. A hidden thing can become more powerful because it is no longer available to casual sight. The burial also marks a change in the human world around the hill. Over the centuries, the broader region moves further into Neolithic life. Settlements become more established. Plant cultivation and animal management become more important. Domestic architecture grows in significance. New ritual forms appear elsewhere. The great circular enclosures of Göbekli Tepe belong strongly to an earlier phase of this transformation, one still deeply tied to wild animals, large communal gatherings, and monumental human-like pillars. As lifeways change, the old spaces may no longer fit the needs of the people who inherit them. They may remain sacred, but sacred in a way that demands closure rather than continued use. The evidence remains incomplete. Yet the burial seems to belong to a world where memory and change meet uneasily. There is also a human humility in the act. Raising a pillar declares presence. Burying it admits that presence has a season. The builders or their descendants do not smash the great stones into nothing. They do not strip them for ordinary construction. They cover them. The animals vanish into darkness. The faceless pillars stand without viewers. The enclosures become silent chambers of packed earth. This is not destruction in the simple sense. It is concealment. And concealment can be a form of respect. It can also be a form of fear, transition, or forgetting. Scholars still debate which of these motives best fits the evidence, and perhaps the answer changes from one enclosure to another. The result is a paradox. Göbekli Tepe survives because it is hidden. Had the pillars remained exposed for 12,000 years, rain, frost, roots, reuse, and human disturbance might have destroyed much of what is now visible. The act that erases the site from ancient site preserves it for modern discovery. The people who buried the enclosures could not have intended to speak to archaeologists in the distant future, yet their closure creates an archive. Their silence becomes unusually durable. By covering the stones, they protect the mystery. The buried hill therefore becomes more than a ruin. It becomes an ancient decision preserved in earth. The last people to see certain pillars before modern excavation may have watched them disappear deliberately, layer by layer, as debris rose around carved animals and stone bodies. A fox sinks beneath fill, a snake is covered, a central pillar loses the sky. The enclosure that once gathered living bodies becomes part of the mound itself. After that, centuries pass, then millennia. Fields spread nearby. Empires rise far away. Languages are born and die. The hill keeps its sealed rooms under the soil, waiting without memory, until archaeology opens what ancient hands once closed. Göbekli Tepe once seemed almost alone, as if one strange hill had broken through the expected order of prehistory by itself. That loneliness made the site feel even more impossible, a single monumental sanctuary before farming villages, standing on its ridge with faceless pillars and dangerous animals, could be treated as an exception, a brilliant anomaly, a local eruption of ritual ambition that didn't necessarily change the broader story. But the ground around southeastern Anatolia has not remained silent. In recent decades, other sites have begun to appear in the wider landscape, and the mystery has expanded. Göbekli Tepe is no longer just one hill with one astonishing secret. It belongs to a broader sacred and social world, a region of carved stone, special buildings, strange human imagery, and repeated gathering places now often discussed under the name Tashtepala, the stone hills. This wider landscape changes the scale of the question. If Göbekli Tepe were completely unique, scholars could try to explain it through one unusual group, one exceptional tradition, one local ritual center with no close parallel. But nearby sites such as Karahan Tepe, Nevalachori, Sefer Tepe, Seyburj, Harbetsuvan, and others suggest that communities across the region share related architectural and symbolic ideas. Not all of these sites are identical, and not all are preserved or understood to the same degree. Some have been damaged, some excavated only partly, and some are still emerging from survey and research. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives in the record suggests that the people of this region are participating in a much larger transformation than one mound can explain. Karahan Tepe is especially important because it shows that monumental imagination in this landscape does not simply repeat the same pattern. Like Göbekli Tepe, it contains T-shaped pillars and carved stone features, but it also includes a striking chamber with carved human heads and a series of stone projections that create an atmosphere different from the circular enclosures on the older hill. One sculpted head appears to rise from stone with a directness that feels almost startling after the faceless pillars of Göbekli Tepe. The site suggests a related symbolic world, but not a copy. This matters because living traditions are rarely mechanical. They change from place to place, from generation to generation, from ritual to ritual. A shared language of stone can produce different local dialects. Nevalchori, now submerged beneath the waters of a modern dam reservoir, offered another crucial clue before it disappeared from view. Excavations there revealed early Neolithic buildings with T-shaped pillars, linking domestic or settlement contexts more closely with special architecture. Its loss beneath water is a reminder that archaeology often works under pressure, recovering what it can before modern development transforms ancient landscapes forever. Nevalachori helped show that the symbolic forms seen at Göbekli Tepe are not isolated inventions. They belong to a regional repertoire, a way of shaping stone and space that communities carry across sites. The fact that one of the key witnesses now lies beneath a reservoir gives the story a quiet irony. Ancient places can vanish twice, once from memory, and again from the modern world that uncovers them. The broader Tashtepala region also reveals how varied early Neolithic life may have been. Some sites appear more settlement-like, some more ceremonial, and some blur the distinction. This is important because the old contrast between a sacred hill and ordinary villages may be too simple. Ritual and daily life do not always occupy separate worlds. People may live near special buildings, visit others seasonally, bury ancestors beneath houses, gather for feasts at hilltop centres, and carry symbols between places. The same carved forms can move through different contexts. A pillar in one place may stand in an enclosure set apart from domestic life. In another, similar imagery may appear closer to houses or communal buildings. Scholars still debate the relationships among these sites, but the pattern suggests a network rather than a single isolated shrine. This network may have helped spread ideas during the long transition towards settled life and agriculture. People moving between sites would carry more than food and tools. They would carry stories, marriage ties, ritual obligations, carving styles, memories of gatherings, and knowledge of where certain stones stand. A person who has seen the pillars at Göbekli Tepe may recognize related forms at Karahan Tepe. A group that feasts at one place may exchange partners or materials with another. Skilled carvers may travel, or their techniques may be learned and adapted by others. The region becomes a landscape of remembered points, each one tied to movement, identity, and obligation. A lesser-known but revealing detail is the presence of carved human figures and narrative scenes at some related sites, including reliefs that seem to show human and animal interactions with a directness different from Göbekli Tepe's more enigmatic arrangements. These images suggest that early Neolithic symbolism is not limited to abstract ritual signs. It can also show bodies in relation, tension, threat, or display. The exact meanings remain uncertain, but they show that communities are experimenting with ways to make human experience visible in stone. The faceless central pillars of Göbekli Tepe may represent one solution to the problem of sacred presence. Other sites try different solutions, giving human heads, bodies, or scenes a more explicit form. The wider landscape also reduces the temptation to imagine Göbekli Tepe as a sudden miracle. Its grandeur remains remarkable, but it now appears as part of a regional tradition with deeper roots and wider branches. Monumental architecture does not emerge from empty ground. It grows from networks of people who already share ideas about stone, animals, bodies, death, feasting, and place. Göbekli Tepe may be one of the most dramatic expressions of this world, perhaps one of its major centres. But it is not the whole world by itself. The mystery becomes less like a single lightning strike, and more like a storm system moving across a region at the edge of the Ice Age. Yet widening the frame does not solve the mystery. It multiplies it. If many communities share these forms, then the question becomes larger. What kind of social world allows this symbolic system to spread before the rise of cities? How do mobile or semi-settled groups maintain a shared ritual language across distance? Why does this region, at this moment, produce so many powerful experiments in stone? No single explanation fully accounts for this. Climate change, resource abundance, social competition, ancestor rituals, feasting, early plant management, and new forms of settlement may all play a role. The stone hills do not replace one mystery with an answer. They reveal that the mystery is regional, persistent, and deeply woven into the birth of the Neolithic world. Seen from this wider landscape, Göbekli Tepe is not a lonely monument anymore. It is one voice in a chorus whose full music has been mostly lost. The hill still stands out, but now it stands among relatives, echoes, and neighbouring experiments. The ancient people of southeastern Anatolia are not merely building one sacred place. They are reshaping the meaning of place itself, across ridges, settlements, enclosures, and carved chambers. They are turning stone into memory and landscape into a map of belonging. The 12,000-year-old mystery grows larger because the hill is no longer alone. Beneath the fields and ridges around it, archaeology begins to glimpse a whole world of stone hills, each one holding part of a story that no single excavation can finish. The wider landscape makes the old story harder to preserve. Once Göbekli Tepe stands among other stone hills, the problem is no longer a single extraordinary mound disrupting a neat archaeological sequence. It becomes a regional pattern, and patterns are more dangerous to old theories than anomalies. An anomaly can be placed to one side, treated as unusual, explained by local genius or special circumstances. A pattern demands revision. Across southeastern Anatolia, the carved pillars, special buildings, animal imagery, and signs of complex gatherings begin to press against a model that once felt almost inevitable: first farming, then villages, then hierarchy, then temples. The stones insist that human symbolic life does not wait politely for the economy to change before it becomes ambitious. For a long time, the Neolithic transformation was often explained in strongly practical terms. Climate shifts and population pressures encouraged people to domesticate plants and animals. Farming produced more dependable food. More food supported larger populations. Larger populations required more permanent settlements. Settlements created storage, property, inheritance, leadership, conflict, and social ranking. Out of these pressures came public buildings, ritual centres, and eventually temples. This model is not foolish. Much of it still matters. Food production really does transform human life. Villages really do create new kinds of social pressure. Surplus really can support specialists and leaders. The problem is not that the older model is entirely wrong. The problem is that Göbekli Tepe shows it is incomplete. The site reveals that monumental ritual architecture can appear before the full package of later village farming is firmly in place. This does not erase agriculture from the story, but it changes the direction of causality. Instead of treating religion as a product of settled life, archaeologists must consider that ritual gathering may help create settled life. Instead of imagining symbolic complexity as something that blooms after economic security, the hill suggests that symbolic obligations may help drive people toward new economic arrangements. The builders do not need wheat fields stretching below the ridge before they can imagine a place of stone beings and dangerous animals. They need social networks, shared meanings, technical skill, and reasons powerful enough to gather people repeatedly. Those reasons may be partly spiritual, partly political, partly ancestral, partly festive, and partly practical, but they are already complex. This challenges an even deeper assumption that human societies become complex mainly because they produce more food. Food is essential, and no monument is built by starving people for long. Yet food alone does not explain why people choose one kind of cooperation over another. A group with abundant wild resources might live comfortably without carving giant pillars. A group under stress might scatter rather than gather. Material conditions create possibilities and pressures. But human beings interpret those pressures through belief, identity, rivalry, and memory. Göbekli Tepe forces archaeology to look at imagination not as decoration on top of survival, but as one of the forces that organizes survival itself. The old category of hunter-gatherer also begins to crack. It once suggested a stage before real social complexity, a way of life defined mostly by mobility and small scale. Modern anthropology and archaeology have already weakened that stereotype in many parts of the world, showing that foraging societies can be socially rich, ritually elaborate, and environmentally sophisticated. Göbekli Tepe adds monumental stone to that argument. The people who build the enclosures are not living in cities, but they are capable of creating architecture that demands planning, shared labor, and symbolic control. They are not farmers in the later sense, but they are not simply wandering through a passive wilderness. They are shaping place, memory, and social obligation on a scale that older language struggles to describe. Hierarchy becomes more difficult to define as well. The site suggests coordination, but not necessarily kingship. It suggests influence, but not necessarily a ruling class. It suggests specialists, but not necessarily full-time professions. Later civilizations make hierarchy visible through tombs, palaces, written titles, elite goods, and unequal houses. At Göbekli Tepe, those markers are absent or unclear. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate whether certain individuals or groups held special authority. Yet the architecture proves that leadership of some kind exists. The challenge is to understand forms of power that are not yet state power. Persuasion, ritual knowledge, prestige, generosity, seasonal coordination, and ancestor memory may all organize labor before command becomes institutional. This is where the hill becomes most unsettling for the idea of progress. The older story often made civilization look like a ladder. People climb from foraging to farming, from farming to villages, from villages to cities, from cities to writing and states. Göbekli Tepe does not fit neatly on that ladder. It suggests a branching path, where ritual monumentality can appear early, where symbolic worlds can become enormous before agriculture is fully established, where people can build something extraordinary without becoming urban. The ladder becomes a web. Different elements of complexity do not always appear in the same order. Monumental architecture, settlement, domestication, social ranking, ritual specialization, and economic intensification can develop together unevenly. pushing and pulling one another across generations. A lesser-known consequence of this shift is that archaeologists become more cautious about using absence as proof of simplicity. If a site lacks houses, it may still be central. If a society lacks writing, it may still preserve complex memory. If people lack domesticated grain, they may still organize large gatherings and manage wild resources intensively. If hierarchy leaves no royal tomb, authority may still exist in temporary or ritual forms. Göbekli Tepe teaches that the archaeological record preserves some kinds of complexity better than others. Stone survives. Wood, fibre, skin, speech, song, gesture, and law do not. A society can be far richer than its surviving materials first appear. The discovery also changes how the beginning of religion is discussed. It does not prove that religion begins at Göbekli Tepe, because symbolic behaviour is vastly older. Humans create art, ornaments, burials, and ritual traces long before the Neolithic. What the hill shows is different. It shows religion, or something close to it, becoming architectural at a large communal scale. It shows belief occupying fixed space and demanding organised labour. That matters because once sacred places become fixed and monumental, they can alter movement, economy, identity, and power. A ritual centre can become a reason to return, and return can become the beginning of settlement. The sacred place may become one of the anchors around which a new kind of life forms. Still, the revised story must remain careful. Göbekli Tepe should not be turned into a simple reversal where religion alone creates farming, villages, and civilization. No single explanation fully accounts for the Neolithic transformation. Climate, ecology, demography, technology, plant behavior, animal behavior, social competition, feasting, memory, and belief all matter. The hill's importance lies in forcing these factors into a more complex relationship. It refuses a single first cause. It shows that human beings are not driven only by hunger, nor only by faith, but by the strange combination of need and meaning that defines the species. By the time the old theories begin to crack, archaeology itself becomes more interesting. The story is no longer a clean march from necessity to culture. It becomes a story of people standing in a changing landscape, gathering wild food, carving dangerous animals, burying their dead, feeding one another, raising stones, and slowly making choices that will reshape the future. Göbekli Tepe does not answer every question about civilization's origin. It does something more valuable. It makes the question deeper. It reminds the modern world that before fields, before kings, before cities, human beings are already building around invisible obligations. The first stones of civilization may not be laid only for bread. They may also be laid for memory, fear, wonder, and the powerful need to gather beneath a shared sky. Even after the stone circles, animal carvings, feasting debris, skull fragments, buried enclosures, and neighbouring sites are placed together, Göbekli Tepe does not become simple, it becomes clearer, but not solved. The hill offers enough evidence to overturn older assumptions, yet not enough to restore the lost world in full. Its builders leave architecture without explanation, symbols without captions, rituals without witnesses, and endings without written memory. Archaeology can narrow the possibilities. It can reject claims that require impossible technology or messages from vanished super-civilizations. It can compare bones, tools, buildings, and landscapes. But the central purpose of the hill remains open in a way that is both frustrating and honest. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for everything found there. One strong interpretation sees Göbekli Tepe as a ritual gathering centre, a place where dispersed groups come together at certain times to perform ceremonies, renew alliances, share food, and maintain a common identity. This fits much of the evidence. The site's monumental enclosures are not ordinary houses. The animal bones suggest large-scale consumption. The location on a ridge gives the hill visibility and separation. The pillars create spaces that feel set apart from daily life. In this view, Göbekli Tepe is not a town with a temple inside it, but a ceremonial centre serving a wider mobile or semi-mobile population. People do not have to live there permanently for the place to shape their world. They return because return itself is part of the social order. Another interpretation places feasting near the heart of the site. The great quantities of wild animal remains, especially from hunted species, make this idea persuasive. Feasting can mobilize labour, create obligation, display prestige, and bind communities together. A group that sponsors a feast can gather people for construction. A successful hunt can become a ritual event. Food can turn cooperation into celebration and competition into social structure. Yet feasting alone does not explain the faceless pillars, the careful animal imagery, the possible skull practices, or the deliberate burial of enclosures. It explains how people may have been brought together, but not fully why the symbolic world takes the form it does. The feast is likely part of the machinery, not the whole machine. Ancestor ritual offers another powerful possibility: the human-like pillars without faces, the special treatment of skull fragments, the concern with closure, and the repeated return to place all fit a world in which the dead remain socially important. The hill may help communities anchor identity across generations. It may allow mobile groups to claim continuity through remembered beings, powerful predecessors, or transformed dead. The pillars may be ancestors, spirits, mythic persons, or beings that stand between human and non-human worlds. Scholars still debate this, because the evidence cannot identify the beings represented by the T-shaped stones. Still, the connection between bodies, skulls, memory, and stone is difficult to ignore. The problem is not that ancestor ritual lacks evidence. The problem is that it may explain only part of a system that also includes animals, food, labour, and landscape. Social competition may also run beneath the surface. Monumental construction can be an act of devotion, but also an act of display. Groups may compete through generosity, carving skill, hunting success, or the ability to organize labour. One enclosure may represent the prestige of one group, another may represent a different network of people. Larger pillars, richer feasts, and more striking carvings may become ways of making identity visible. This interpretation helps explain why repeated construction continues across generations, and why labour is invested in forms that exceed practical need. Yet competition by itself feels too thin unless it is tied to belief. People may compete, but they compete through symbols that matter. Prestige works because the monument is already sacred, ancestral, dangerous, or socially charged. Climate and environmental change form another layer. The end of the Ice Age and the Younger Dryas create pressures and opportunities across the region. Shifting rainfall, changing plant zones, and moving herds may encourage people to gather, cooperate, experiment with wild grains, and attach new importance to reliable places. Environmental stress can intensify social behaviour, but climate cannot explain the carvings in any direct way. A cold or dry period does not automatically produce T-shaped pillars, foxes, vultures, and carefully buried enclosures. Climate is part of the stage, not the script. It shapes the conditions under which people act, but it does not dictate the meanings they create. Then there are the popular theories that gather around Göbekli Tepe, because mystery always attracts certainty from those who dislike uncertainty. Some claim the site records a comet impact, an astronomical warning, or a lost code of the stars. Others fold it into stories of Atlantis, forgotten advanced civilizations, or knowledge passed down from a vanished age. A few of these ideas begin from real features, such as animal imagery, abstract symbols, or the fact that late Ice Age climate change includes dramatic events. But they often move far beyond what the evidence can support. Mainstream archaeology does not need aliens, lost machines, or a destroyed global civilization to explain the site. Stone tools, human labour, regional networks, ritual imagination, and changing environments are enough to account for its construction. What remains mysterious is not whether humans could build it. The mystery is what they believed they were doing when they built it. Even the phrase oldest temple can mislead. Göbekli Tepe may be among the oldest known monumental ritual sites, but calling it the first temple risks turning a complex discovery into a slogan. Older ritual behaviour exists elsewhere in human history, though not usually in this architectural form. Other early sites in the region are still being excavated and understood. New discoveries may change the chronology, the categories, or the interpretation. The safer and more interesting statement is that Göbekli Tepe reveals a monumental ritual world far earlier than once expected, at a moment when hunting, gathering, plant management, settlement, and belief are all changing together. The unsolved part, then, is not a blank. It is a dense knot of partial answers. Göbekli Tepe may be a gathering place, a feast centre, an ancestral landscape, a ritual theatre, a social arena, a seasonal anchor, and a place where communities negotiate their future without knowing that future will later be called the Neolithic. Each explanation catches one side of the hill and leaves another side in shadow. That is why the mystery endures with unusual strength. The evidence is not too weak to matter. It is strong enough to demand interpretation and incomplete enough to resist final possession. The stones stand at the border between what archaeology can know and what human beings once meant. In that borderland, the hill remains alive. The shadow beneath civilization is not a single secret hidden under the hill, waiting for one final discovery to explain everything. It is the realization that the familiar beginning of history may have been too narrow. Göbekli Tepe does not show people becoming human because they learn to farm, build houses, or live under rulers. It shows people already fully human before those later structures harden around them, already capable of memory, labour, fear, beauty, rivalry, ceremony, and collective imagination. The pillars stand at the edge of the Neolithic world like witnesses from an earlier order, where the wild still dominates food and symbolism, where animals are not yet domesticated companions of settlement, where the dead may still be handled through practices that blur grief and ritual, and where a hilltop can become powerful enough to draw people back across generations. The legacy of the site begins with this reversal. For a long time, civilization seemed to begin with practical problems: how to grow more food, store grain, defend land, organize labor, and manage growing populations. Those problems are real, and they will shape every later city, kingdom, and empire. But Göbekli Tepe suggests that another force is already at work before those systems fully emerge. Human beings gather around meanings they cannot eat. They spend energy on symbols that do not directly fill a stomach. They build spaces where the visible world is rearranged into something charged with memory and presence. This does not make survival less important. It shows that survival for humans has never been only biological. People need food, but they also need belonging, explanation, identity, and ways to stand before death. What survives in the record suggests that belief may have helped pull people toward new forms of life. A sacred hill or ceremonial center can make return necessary. Return can make storage useful. Storage can make plant management attractive. Plant management can lead, slowly and unevenly, toward cultivation. Cultivation can support settlement, and settlement can create new forms of power and conflict. This chain is not simple, and scholars still debate the order of causes. Yet the site makes it possible to imagine civilization not as a machine built only from grain and labour, but as a web woven from hunger, ritual, landscape, and memory together. The first fields may not have been planted only because people wanted more food. They may also have been planted because people needed to feed gatherings, honour obligations, and return to places that had become too important to abandon. The irony is that the world hinted at by Göbekli Tepe will not last. The wild animals carved into the pillars belong to a relationship with nature that agriculture will gradually transform. Gazelle continue to move across open country, but human settlements grow. Wild grains become crops. Certain animals become herds. Forests, grasslands, and river valleys are reshaped by human hands. The freedom and uncertainty of mobile life gives way in many places to the security and burden of fixed fields. Populations rise, diseases spread more easily, work changes, inequality becomes easier to preserve. The road from the hill to later civilization is not a simple triumph. It is a bargain, and like many bargains in history, its full cost is understood only afterward. Göbekli Tepe therefore leaves a double image. On one side, it is astonishing evidence of human cooperation before cities. On the other, it is a monument at the threshold of a transformation that will eventually make such a world vanish. The builders stand with one foot in the ancient life of hunters and gatherers, and another in the emerging Neolithic order, though they would not have seen it that way. They are not founding civilization with a plan. They are responding to their own needs, fears, memories, and ceremonies. They gather, carve, feast, bury, return, and begin again. Later ages will build walls, temples, archives, palaces, tombs, and roads. But something of that later world is already foreshadowed on the ridge, the urge to bind a community through a place made sacred by shared effort. The mystery still haunts archaeology because it refuses final possession. Every discovery gives the hill more shape and more depth, yet the original meanings remain beyond reach. The fox does not explain itself. The vulture does not speak. The faceless pillars stand in a silence that no excavation can entirely break. Modern researchers can study tool marks, radiocarbon dates, sediments, bones, and architecture, but they cannot recover the full atmosphere of a night gathering on the hill 12,000 years ago, when fires burn, meat cooks, stone figures rise in darkness, and people look towards symbols whose meanings were as real to them as the landscape itself. The evidence is enough to change history, but not enough to close the question. That may be the true legacy of Göbekli Tepe. It does not give archaeology a neat beginning. It gives archaeology a deeper beginning, one in which civilization grows not from a single invention, but from a long entanglement of climate, food, ritual, death, memory, and desire. It reminds the present that the earliest monuments are not only records of power, they are records of longing. Before writing, before kings, before cities, people are already reaching beyond the immediate world, shaping stone into presences and gathering beneath the sky to make meaning together. Beneath civilization lies not emptiness, but older forms of human complexity, half seen and still powerful. The hill keeps that shadow in the earth, and even now, after excavation brings its pillars back into daylight, it remains partly buried in the one place archaeology cannot fully enter the vanished minds of the people who made it. The hill grows quiet again after all the questions have been asked. The wind moves over the ridge as it must have moved long before any name was given to the place, passing over limestone, dry grass, and the faint outlines of a world remade many times. The pillars that once stood hidden now face the light again, but their silence has not been broken. They do not reveal the names of the builders. They do not say which ceremony mattered most, which animal was feared, which ancestor was remembered. Or which gathering marked the final day before an enclosure was covered and left asleep beneath the mound? In the long view of time, Göbekli Tepe is both ancient and strangely close. 12,000 years seems almost unreachable, yet the human impulses around it are familiar. People gather because they are afraid, because they remember, because they hope, because they owe something to the living and the dead. They build because a place must be marked. They feast because no community exists only in thought. They bury because endings need shape. The forms change across history. But the need beneath them remains. Beyond the hill, the Neolithic world continues to unfold. Villages grow, seeds change. Animals are drawn closer to human hands. The long road towards cities begins, not as a straight road, but as a path made by countless decisions no one records. Some choices are practical, some are sacred, most are both. The people who carve the pillars never see the empires that later rise from the lands around them. They never see writing, bronze armies, temple economies, royal tombs, or the heavy machinery of recorded history. Yet their world leaves a mark deep enough to trouble the modern story of beginnings. Perhaps that is why the mystery endures. It is not only a question about one archaeological site, it is a question about what civilization is built from. Not only grain, not only walls, not only power, but memory and imagination, fear and ceremony, hunger and wonder, stone and silence. On the ridge of Göbekli Tepe, the first light falls across animals carved before history knew how to write itself down. The fox remains still. The snakes remain still. The pillars stand without faces, holding their old inward gaze. Around them, the landscape opens into distance, and the past withdraws slowly, leaving only the hill, the wind, and the feeling that something immense began there, just beyond the reach of words.